What we're going to talk about now is putting end caps on our prisms. Sometimes we'll have shell in here, we need to cap both ends. Other times we're just going to cap the end with no shell inside. So I have three different scenarios that I'll demonstrate. One is a recently formed prism, so we have the outer shell, but the two ends are presently open, and we're going to cap one of those ends. The middle one here already has one end capped, and it's partially filled with shell. I'll finish the shell fill, and you'll see what capping that other end looks like. So now we have it sandwiched between the two. And then this last one over here also has one end cap on already, but we're going to add a second end cap without putting anything on the inside. So these are three different end cap scenarios you're going to probably have to deal with. So this first scenario, and again, it has no cap on either end, so this would be the first cap you're putting in. We have a form. It's essentially a triangle that fits the inside dimension, but is about 1/4 to 3/8 inch smaller. So this dimension is slightly smaller than the inside here. It's covered with plastic, which allows this to be peeled away from the JRCSA once it's set. And then it sits on a pedestal, and that pedestal is roughly about 44 inches in length, maybe 45. And so we're going to slide this down inside. You'll see it fits just inside here. And now what we have is this is recessed inside, and it's about 3 inches, somewhere between 2 and 3 inches is where you want to put that end cap. And that's important because we like to have these this flange, so when we pick these up, we have something to hold on to. If this was set right to the end, you'd have nothing to hold on to. It's more difficult. We have a carrying device that uses this kind of a end piece in here. So you want to have this set inside the edge by at least 2 inches and pushing 3 inches. So this is good set. Next thing we're going to set up here is our shell. So we have this partially filled with shell already. I'm going to add some more shell. And one thing you want to make sure you do as you're adding the shell is to shake this and have that shell settle in. It's otherwise what will happen is it'll settle later, and then we'll have a big gap in some areas. So you got to be pretty vigorous in that shaking. But similar to this being recessed, we also want to have the end of our shell down below the top. We don't want to bring this up flush. And then what I'll typically do is rearrange these shells in a way that we might have a flatter top, maybe have the shells not cup side up, but basically the outside up, if that makes sense. And just kind of orient these a little bit so you have a little nicer surface to lay that jute material in. And so this one's right on the edge of about 2 inches deep or so, and that'll be just about the way we want it. Now this last prism scenario again has one end on the other side, so we can't use the first technique. We're not filling it up with anything, so we don't have shell to support, but we have to have some way to support the jute that we're going to place inside here and keep it from falling down through. And one technique I found is literally to get some shish kebab skewers and a piece of cardboard. The cardboard, you're going to cut roughly the diameter or the size of this opening, but the shish kebab skewers you're going to run through, again, about 2 to 3 inches down below the edge. You're going to run it through some of the holes in the side, and you're going to create a bit of a lattice that you can then later support the piece of cardboard on. And you don't need a lot of these, but you need enough to realize there's going to be a little bit of weight that comes along with the cement when it is placed on here. Plus, as the cement starts to wet the cardboard a little bit, it'll soften it to some extent. So we're going to want to place at least 3 in here, maybe some more, to make sure we've got a good cover. Let's see here, maybe one more. So here's just an example of one scenario, and we're going to use that now to support our cardboard that we're going to push down in here. And you're going to want to make sure that your cardboard seats down in there so there's sufficient cement or concrete available up here so that that jute, when it comes in, can attach to those sides. All right, so we've got these three prepped, and we're actually going to make a batch of CSA that can fit all these at the same time, or set these all at the same time. Typically, you would not have this sort of diversity, but you could. Regardless, these are now ready. I've cut some jute ends that will now fit over the end. They don't have to be perfect. I would not cut them triangular. Square or rectangular is fine. This is 14 inches length. So the smallest dimension of this particular jute is 14 inches. It can overhang here, but this is all going to end up inside in the end. All right, so we've got 3 of these jute panels ready to go. We're going to make a quick mix. The other thing you want to do is, depending on how long these have sat around, we might want to moisten the edges just a little bit. If you have a hose handy, you can spritz it that way instead, but just to moisten that surface a little bit, it's going to be a little easier for the CSA to stick to that surface. All right. So I have a mix already weighed out. We've got our water. I'll add the water. So I failed. Definitely need your glasses. Make our mix. So we have our mix, and in this case, because of the size of our panels here, we don't really have to pour it into a separate tub. We can just use our 5-gallon pail, and I've done up to probably 8 or so end panels this way, so you don't really have to dirty another tub for this. But you're going to want to agitate this for a similar length of time that you would the main, prism jute material. You want to make sure that CSA has had a chance to get in to all those individual strands and fibers, and everything is well agitated. All right, once you think you've got it squared away, here's one, and now you can see how much these warp and weft lines have been manipulated, but don't be discouraged with that. We can still make this work. The main thing we're going to do is just lay it in there for now. Okay, and I usually go and take each one of my panels and drop it in to their respective locations. But this is one of the challenges of this jute material, because those fibers are very loose. Sometimes it's not quite this bad, but all right, so we're going to try to get that oriented as best we can. Lay one of the square edges up against one of your other edges. Spread that jute out on the inside, but you don't want to have any of your strands outside. So we even have our tape in here. That's okay. Don't worry about it. But the key thing here is that we are going to take our JRCSA and we're going to put it into our form, but we want to fold it up on the edges a little bit. So our material that's coming in flat like this is actually going to be curled up on this edge. So when we put it in, we're going to have some of our fiber laying up on the edges of our prism. And that really helps to lock it in to that space. And so you can arrange in whatever way it takes to get enough of that JRCSA laying up on the edges. And then once you've got that, you can have just a small fiber network in the center to keep oysters and whatnot in. But then you're going to want to make sure you kind of wedge the edges of that JRCSA around your form, or basically around the inside of the prism. All right, so here's our rectangle. We're going to lay that up on that side. We're going to make sure we bring it in from all of our edges. And even if you have like a little gap up here, that's okay. It's, you know, as long as it's not going to let an oyster fall through. And so then here's what I'm talking about. We're going to kind of tamp that edge down and really jam it in there. So as it sets, it's going to lock itself into whatever nooks and crannies might exist in the, you know, the actual prism material. We're going to do our last one here. We've got a rogue strand there. All right, so basically that's all we need to do to have our end pieces squared away. These really don't have to kind of set to the same degree because structurally that's not really all that important. You know, they really only need to hold in some of our oysters or essentially exclude something from wanting to swim in. So easily after this has its first set, you know, within hours, I'll pull this form off. I usually also do not put any sort of a plastic covering over these ends. So unlike the curing and trying to maintain moisture content for our main prism wrap, I tend not to worry about that too much on the end pieces here. So once the end pieces have cured, it's as simple as this first one here, flipping it over and removing the form insert. Can be a little bit tricky because it's the sides can sometimes bend in, but basically you just remove the insert and you've got one end now in your prism. At this point you could fill it full of shell or you could replace the other end. It just depends on what you want to do. Sometimes you can poke a hole in the sides to open it up a little bit more. The one that was shell filled before is ready to deploy now. We've got basically our cage that is containing the shell on the inside, so that one's secure. Now this last one, where again we have another end on the bottom, and we needed to put a cap on this end, there's a piece of cardboard in between. The cardboard will basically just dissolve once deployed in the ocean, but we do want to take our pieces of wood out, or shish kebab skewers. That one didn't work. Sometimes you'll need a pair of pliers for this and get stuck in there pretty good. But basically all of those are now removed. Our cardboard is still in that space, but again it will dissolve and just disappear at some point. So that's pretty much it for these end caps. 3 different ways to put caps on. All depends on the deployment type and whether or not you already have one end on.